The water closed over Meridian O'Yelleran's head as the first bullets tore through the space where she had been standing. She heard it before she saw it, that distinctive crack of rounds breaking the sound barrier, coming from 3 directions at once. Ambush. The word flashed through her mind, even as her body was already moving, rifle clutched to her chest, lungs holding their last breath. Above her, the tributary ran red with someone's blood. Below her, in the murky darkness, Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran began to count. 1, 2, 3. She needed 30 seconds of air. She would give herself 20. 6 hours earlier, Firebase Kestrel had hummed with the quiet tension of an operation about to launch. Mary stood at the back of the briefing room, her eyes fixed on the map projection while Captain Aldrich Sorn walked the team through insertion points and extraction windows. He was handsome in that polished way staff officers often were, his uniform crisp, his voice confident. The kind of man who made generals feel comfortable. Sergeant First Class Brogan Vickers sat in the front row, arms crossed, nodding along to everything Sorn said. He was team leader, 15 years in special operations, and he had made it clear from day one that he did not need a female sniper on his team. Army politics, he had called her assignment. What a feeling. Mary had said nothing. She never did. Her rifle would speak when it mattered. Before we follow Mary into the jungle, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you know someone who has served in places most maps do not show. Sorn pointed to a route along the tributary system. This is your approach vector. Optimal concealment, minimal exposure. He glanced toward the back of the room, finding Mary. Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran, you will provide overwatch from this ridgeline once the team reaches the observation point. Mary studied the route. The tributary wound through dense canopy, which was good, but it also channeled movement into predictable patterns. Anyone watching that water would know exactly where to set up fields of fire. She raised her hand. Sorn's eyebrow lifted. Question? That approach puts us in a natural kill zone for 600 meters, Mary said. If anyone is watching the tributary, we are walking into a funnel. Vickers turned in his seat. The route is fine. Intel says the area is clear. Intel says, Mary repeated, but the terrain says something different. Sorn smiled, the kind of smile that pretended to be patient. Staff Sergeant, I have been running operations in this theater for 2 years. The route is optimized for your team's capabilities. He paused just long enough for the next words to land. All of your team's capabilities. A few of the men shifted. Mary felt their eyes. She understood what Sorn meant, what he was implying about her, about why a safer route might be necessary. She also understood that arguing further would only confirm their assumptions about difficult women who could not follow orders. She nodded once and said nothing else. After the briefing, Mary checked her gear in the staging area. Her rifle was a thing of beauty, an M110 semi-automatic sniper system that she had carried through 3 deployments. She knew its voice better than she knew most people. A sound made her look up. Specialist Davina Ketch stood 3 meters away, checking her pack for what had to be the 10th time. The young woman's hands were trembling slightly, her movements quick and scattered. Mary watched for a moment, then walked over. First real op? Ketch startled, then nodded. That obvious? Only to someone who remembers their own first time. Mary reached out and adjusted the specialist's pack straps, pulling them tighter in a configuration that would distribute weight better during movement. She showed her a trick for keeping her hands steady, pressing thumbs against forefingers in a specific pattern. You will do fine. Stay close to me. Ketch exhaled. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. Mary allowed herself a small smile. It faded as she caught Vickers watching from across the staging area. His expression made his thoughts clear. Coddling the new girl. Soft. She held his gaze until he looked away. The helicopter insertion went smooth. Too smooth, Mary thought as they moved through the jungle toward the tributary. The canopy above blocked most of the fading daylight, turning the world into shades of green and shadow. Water sounds grew louder as they approached the river system. Vickers held up a fist. The team froze. He signaled them forward, and they descended toward the tributary's edge. Mary felt it before she heard it. a wrongness in the air, a pressure that did not belong. She opened her mouth to call out. The jungle exploded. Now she was underwater, counting, feeling the current tug at her body as bullets churned the surface above. 15 seconds. She pushed along the riverbed, letting the flow carry her downstream. Her lungs burned. 20 seconds. She needed to surface, needed to breathe, needed to see who was still alive. She came up behind a fallen tree, gasping as quietly as she could manage. The tributary ran past her, and in it floated the body of Corporal Weston, his eyes staring at nothing. Further upstream, she could hear screaming. "Catch!" The specialist was screaming. Mary pulled herself onto the bank, rifle up, scanning. 3 hostiles visible on the far side, moving toward the screaming. 2 more dragging someone into the jungle. Vickers lay face down in the shallows, the back of his head gone. Movement to her left. She swung her rifle and found Specialist Torres floating face down, drifting toward her. Dead. Another one dead. She reached out to push his body aside. Torres coughed. Water sprayed from his mouth and his eyes fluttered open, unfocused and terrified. He tried to speak and only managed a wet gurgle. His hands clutched at his stomach, and Mary saw the blood blooming through his fingers. Gut shot. He had maybe 24 hours without medevac. Probably less. Upstream, Ketch's screaming stopped abruptly. Mary watched 2 insurgents drag the specialist's limp body into the tree line, disappearing into shadows. She looked at Torres, then at the jungle where Ketch had vanished. Her rifle held 17 rounds. There were at least 6 enemies visible, probably more in the trees. Torres would die if she left him. Ketch might already be dead. Torres's hand found her wrist, grip weak but desperate. His lips moved, forming a single word. "Please." Mary made her choice. Mary grabbed Torres under his arms and pulled. He groaned, a low animal sound that she silenced with her hand over his mouth. She whispered directly into his ear, "I need you quiet. Not if you understand." He nodded. She dragged him through the shallows, keeping low, using the tributary's current to mask their movement. Every splash sounded like thunder in her ears. The insurgents upstream were organizing, their voices carrying across the water in a language she did not speak but understood well enough. They were searching. They were hunting. A dense cluster of reeds rose from the water 20 meters ahead. Mary pushed toward it, muscles burning, Torres's weight threatening to pull them both under. She could feel his blood warm against her hands, mixing with the river water, leaving a trail that any tracker worth their pay would find within hours. She reached the reeds and pulled Torres into their cover. The stalks closed around them like a cage, blocking sight lines, creating a pocket of shadow in the fading light. Mary pressed Torres against the muddy bank and examined his wound. The bullet had entered just below his ribs on the left side. Exit wound in the back, which meant it had passed through. That was good. It also meant potential damage to intestines, kidney, spleen. He needed surgery, antibiotics, blood. He needed things she could not give him in a swamp in the middle of hostile territory. Torres grabbed her wrist again. His eyes were clearer now, focused on her face. "Catch," he managed. They took Catch. "I know. We have to go after her." Mary checked the magazine in her rifle. 17 rounds. She scanned what she could see of the riverbank through the reeds. The insurgents had spread out, at least 8 visible now, moving in pairs along both sides of the tributary. Professional spacing. Professional movement patterns. This was not some local militia. These men had training. "You were a good shot," she said quietly. "You have maybe 20 hours before sepsis kills you. If I leave you here to chase Catch, you die. If I stay with you, we might both live long enough to find another way." Torres stared at her. His jaw tightened. She saw him working through the math, the same calculation she had already made. He was 22 years old. She had read his file before the mission. Married 3 years, daughter born 11 months ago. A little girl he had seen exactly twice because deployments kept pulling him away. His eyes reminded her of Tobias. The same desperate hope, the same fear that understood its own mortality. Her brother had been 23 when the notification officers came to her grandmother's door in Houston. Killed in action, they said. An ambush in a place that did not exist on civilian maps. Just like this place. She had not been there to save Tobias. She had been stateside, finishing sniper school, learning to kill from a distance while her little brother bled out in some forgotten valley. Mary pushed the memory down. She cannot afford it right now. I am not leaving you, she told Torres. Do you understand? I'm going to get you out of here. Torres's hand found hers. His grip was weak, but certain. My daughter, he whispered. Her name is Lily. Mary nodded. Tell me about her later. Right now, I need you to stay quiet and stay still. She pulled her radio from its pouch. The casing was cracked, the screen dark. She pressed the power button and nothing happened. Dead. Destroyed in the ambush or the water or both. She checked Torres's radio next. His was damaged too, the antenna bent at an ugly angle, but when she powered it on, static crackled through the speaker. Mary adjusted the frequency dial. The static shifted, caught fragments of voices, lost them again. The radio worked barely. Short range only, maybe 2 kilometers if she was lucky. Not enough to reach Firebase Kestrel directly. A shout from upstream. Mary froze. Through the reeds, she saw 2 insurgents pointing toward the water, gesturing at something she could not see. One of them raised his rifle. She pressed herself lower, pushing Torres deeper into the mud. The water reached their chins. She could feel Torres's breathing accelerate, panic building in his chest. Slow breaths, she whispered. Slow and shallow. The insurgents fired 3 rounds into the water. Mary heard the bullets thunk into something soft. Probably Weston's body, still floating downstream. The men left. One of them kicked the corpse toward the current. Mary waited until they moved on. Then she waited 5 minutes more, counting heartbeats, listening to the jungle settle into its evening chorus. Insects, birds, the gentle murmur of water over stones. When she was certain they were alone, she turned to Torres. Can you move? He tried to sit up. The color drained from his face, and he sagged back down. Not fast. Slow is fine. We move at night. Use the tributary for cover. There's an old observation post 2 kilometers southeast. Abandoned, but it might have supplies. Maybe a working radio. Torres nodded. His teeth were chattering despite the warm water. Shock setting in. She needed to get him somewhere dry, somewhere she could treat the wound properly. Mary scanned the reeds one more time. The tributary stretched before them, a dark ribbon cutting through the jungle. Her entire world had narrowed to this water and the man beside her. Everything else, the mission, the ambush, even catch, would have to wait. She thought of her brother again. How she had spent 3 years learning to be what he needed, too late to matter. Now here was Torres, gut shot and fading, with a daughter waiting at home. The universe offering her a chance to do what she could not do before. She adjusted her grip on her rifle. Somewhere upstream, an insurgent scout had separated from the main group. She watched him through the reeds as he moved along the bank, checking shadows, his weapon held casually. 200 meters. Easy shot. His death would tell the others exactly where she was, but it would also tell them what happened when they got too close. The scout stopped. He seemed to be looking directly at the reeds where she hid. His rifle came up. Mary exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and sent him spinning into the water. The shot echoed across the tributary, and then there was silence. The kind of silence that meant everything had changed. Mary grabbed Torres and began to pull him downstream. Behind her, the tributary ran silent. It would not stay that way for long. But for now, in this moment, she had made her choice. Torres would live. Ketch would have to hold on. And anyone who came looking for Staff Sergeant Meridian O'Yelleran would learn why they called her rifle her only voice. The jungle swallowed them whole as the last light faded from the sky. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, the tributary wound toward whatever came next. Mary did not know if it led to salvation or death. She only knew she would not stop moving until she found out. They moved through the water like ghosts. Mary kept one arm locked around Torres's chest, pulling him along while her other hand gripped her rifle above the surface. The tributary had narrowed here, the current stronger, the banks steeper. Moonlight filtered through gaps in the canopy and painted silver streaks across the black water. Torres drifted in and out of consciousness. When he was awake, he helped kick, adding just enough momentum to keep them moving. When he faded, his body went slack and Mary carried his full weight against the current. She had been counting time in her head. 3 hours since the ambush. 3 hours since Vickers died with his face in the mud. 3 hours since she watched Ketch disappear into the jungle. The insurgents would have regrouped by now. They would have found the scout she killed. They would know someone survived. A sound ahead made her freeze. She pulled Torres toward the bank, pressing them both into the shadows beneath an overhanging root system. The water lapped against her chin as she listened. Voices. 2 men, maybe 30 meters upstream, speaking in low tones. She heard the crackle of a radio, a burst of static, a response she could not make out. They were coordinating, searching in patterns. Mary held her breath. Torres stirred against her, his eyes fluttering open. She pressed her hand over his mouth before he could make a sound. His body tensed, then relaxed as he understood. The voices grew closer. She could hear footsteps now, boots on soft earth, the rustle of vegetation being pushed aside. A flashlight beam swept across the water 10 meters from their position. It lingered on the surface, searching for movement, for blood, for any sign of the Americans who had slipped through their ambush. Mary did not move. She did not blink. She became part of the darkness, part of the water, part of the ancient root system that hid them. The beam moved on. The footsteps faded. The voices grew distant and then disappeared entirely. She waited another 10 minutes before she allowed herself to breathe normally. Torres had passed out again, his head lolling against her shoulder. His skin was too hot. Fever setting in. The infection was spreading faster than she had hoped. They needed shelter. They needed to stop moving long enough for her to treat his wound properly. And they needed a working radio, which meant going back to the ambush site. Mary weighed the options as she pulled Torres further downstream. The observation post she had mentioned was still at least a kilometer away. Even if she reached it, there was no guarantee it would have supplies or communications equipment. The ambush site was closer, maybe 500 meters back upstream. She knew for certain that Corporal Weston had carried a backup radio in his pack. If the insurgents had not stripped the bodies completely, it might still be there. Going back meant moving through territory the enemy was actively searching. It meant leaving Torres alone and vulnerable. It meant risking everything on a piece of equipment that might be destroyed or gone. But staying dark meant Torres died. It meant Ketch stayed captured. It meant the men who set this ambush won. The tributary curved ahead, opening into a wider section where mangrove roots created a maze of channels and islands. Mary spotted a dense cluster of vegetation rising from the water, thick enough to hide a person, elevated enough to stay mostly dry. She pulled Torres toward it. The hide site was better than she expected. A natural pocket had formed between the root systems, creating a small platform of tangled wood and accumulated debris. She lifted Torres onto it, checking his wound in the dim moonlight. The bleeding had slowed, but the flesh around the entry point was swollen and hot. She needed antibiotics. She needed surgical tools. She needed a hospital. She had river water and a combat knife. Mary cleaned the wound as best she could, using strips torn from her undershirt as bandages. Torres woke during the process, his jaw clenched against the pain. He did not scream. She respected him for that. When she finished, he lay back against the roots and stared up at the canopy. "My daughter," he said quietly. "She has my wife's eyes. Brown, almost black. When she looks at me, I feel like she can see everything I have ever done. Good and bad." Mary checked her rifle, ensuring no water had entered the barrel. "You will see her again." Torres turned his head to look at her. "You do not know that." "No, but I'm going to act like I do." He almost smiled. "Where did you learn to be this stubborn?" "My grandmother. She raised me after my parents died. Hurricane took them when I was 6. She used to say that the world will always try to knock you down, but the water only wins if you stop swimming." Torres was quiet for a moment. The jungle sounds filled the silence between them. "Your brother," he said finally. "The one you mentioned. What happened to him?" Mary felt the familiar tightness in her chest. She did not talk about Tobias. Not to anyone. But something about this moment, this place, this man who might not survive the night, made her want to speak. "Ambush," she said. "Similar to this one. His unit was moving through a valley in Afghanistan. Someone gave up their route. They walked right into a kill zone." He paused, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. "He was 23. I was stateside, finishing training. By the time I found out, he'd been dead for 6 hours." Torres reached out and touched her arm. "I'm sorry." Mary looked at his hand, then at his face. The fever made his eyes glassy, but beneath it she saw something real. Understanding. Empathy from a man who was facing his own death. "I joined snipers because of him," she said. "I cannot be there to protect him up close. So I learned to protect people from far away. To see threats before they see us. To stop ambushes before they happen." She thought of Vickers dismissing her warning about the approach route. She thought of Soren smiling as he outlined the path that led them straight into slaughter. "Someone gave us up too," she said. "That ambush was not random. They knew exactly where we would be and when we would be there." Torres's eyes widened slightly. "You think there's a leak?" "I think there's a traitor. And I think he is sitting comfortable at Firebase Kestrel right now, wondering why his insurgent friends have not confirmed the kill." The words hung in the humid air. Torres stared at her, processing the implications. If she was right, calling for help might bring more enemies instead of rescue. Every radio transmission could be a death sentence. Mary stood and checked the surrounding water. The tributary stretched out in both directions, dark and silent. She needed that backup radio. She needed to know what they were dealing with. "Stay hidden," she told Torres. "Do not move, do not make sound. I will be back before dawn." "Where are you going?" "Back to the ambush site. Weston had a secondary radio. If it is still there, we might have a chance." Torres grabbed her wrist. His grip was weaker than before. "And if they are waiting for you?" Mary looked down at him. "Then I will give them what they are looking for." She slipped into the water and let the current carry her upstream, toward the dead and the dark and whatever waited in between. Behind her, the mangroves swallowed Torres from view. Ahead, the tributary ran silent, keeping its secrets close. She had a traitor to find and a friend to save. The water was cold against her skin as she moved, but the anger burning in her chest kept her warm. The ambush site smelled of copper and gunpowder. Mary approached from downstream, using the tributary's deeper channel to mask her movement. She surfaced behind a submerged log and studied the killing ground through her rifle scope. The bodies had been arranged. That was the first thing she noticed. Vickers, Weston, and the others had been pulled from the water and laid out in a row on the bank. Their weapons were gone. Their packs had been torn open and scattered. Someone had taken time to do this. Someone had wanted to send a message. Written in blood on a flat rock, near the bodies were words she could not read. The script was unfamiliar, but the meaning was clear enough. This was a warning. A trophy display. Mary scanned the tree line. No movement. No sounds beyond the normal chorus of insects and nightbirds. The insurgents had searched this area and moved on, confident that anyone who survived the initial ambush would not be foolish enough to return. She waited 15 minutes, watching for any sign of a trap. When she was satisfied, she slipped from the water and moved in a low crouch toward Weston's body. The young corporal's face was peaceful in death. His eyes had been closed, either by the current or by someone who still held some respect for fallen enemies. Mary did not have time for sentiment. She searched his vest, his pockets, the remnants of his pack. The backup radio was there, damaged but intact. She powered it on and heard static, then fragments of voice traffic. American voices. Firebase Kestrel's frequency. She almost keyed the mic, almost called for extraction right there. But something stopped her, a detail that did not fit. Weston's body had been stripped of weapons and ammunition, but his radio had been left behind. His GPS unit was still clipped to his vest. His emergency beacon, the one that could broadcast their position to satellites overhead, remained untouched in its pouch. The insurgents had taken guns and bullets. They had left communications equipment. That made no sense unless they wanted any survivors to call for help, unless they were listening, unless they knew exactly which frequencies to monitor. Mary pocketed the radio and the GPS without activating either one. She searched the other bodies quickly, looking for anything useful. Extra magazines, a first aid kit with antibiotics, water purification tablets. She stuffed everything into a salvage pack and prepared to move. A glint of metal caught her eye. One of the dead insurgents lay at the edge of the tree line, the one she had not seen during the initial chaos. He had been killed by someone else, probably caught in crossfire from his own people. Mary approached the body and froze. The man was carrying American equipment, an M4 rifle with U.S. Army markings, a tactical vest identical to the ones her team wore, and in his pocket, a laminated card with radio frequencies and call signs that should never exist outside a secure operations center. She recognized one of the call signs immediately. Whisky Actual, Captain Aldrich Soren's designation. Mary stared at the card. Her mind raced through the implications. Soren had provided the mission briefing. Soren had insisted on the approach route. Soren had dismissed her warnings about the kill zone. And now here was an insurgent carrying Soren's call sign and frequencies, equipped with American weapons, waiting in exactly the right position to ambush her team. The rage came slowly, building from somewhere deep in her chest. 6 soldiers dead. Ketch captured. Torres dying in a mangrove hide. All because a man in a pressed uniform had sold them out. She wanted to scream. She wanted to put a bullet through Soren's skull. Instead, she controlled her breathing and finished searching the insurgent. She found a damaged cell phone in his jacket. The screen was cracked, but it powered on, showing partial message logs. Most were corrupted or in languages she could not read. But one thread was in English. Package arriving 1800 local. Tributary approach confirmed. No survivors. The timestamp matched the day of their mission. The reply came from a number with an American country code. Understood. Payment transferred. Confirm when complete. Mary photographed the screen with Weston's intact camera, then pocketed the phone. Evidence. Proof that someone at Firebase Kestrel had orchestrated this massacre. She did not know yet how high the betrayal went, but she knew where it started. Captain Aldrich Soren was going to answer for what he had done. But first, she had to survive long enough to make him. She slipped back into the tributary and began the long swim downstream. The radio in her pack felt heavier than it should, weighted with the knowledge that using it might bring death instead of rescue. She needed to find a frequency Soren could not monitor. She needed to reach someone outside his network. The swim took nearly an hour. By the time she reached the mangrove hide, the first hints of gray were lightening the eastern sky. Torres was where she had left him, unconscious but breathing. His fever had worsened. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin before she even touched him. Mary administered antibiotics from the salvaged first aid kit. She changed his bandages and made him drink water mixed with electrolyte powder. He stirred during the process, his eyes opening to narrow slits. "You came back," he whispered. "I told you I would. Did you find a radio?" Mary hesitated. "I found more than that." She told him about the arranged bodies, the American equipment on the dead insurgent, the frequencies and call signs that proved someone at Firebase had betrayed them. Torres listened without interrupting, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to cold fury. "Soren," he said when she finished, "that smug bastard. We cannot use the radio to call Firebase directly. If Soren is monitoring, he will know exactly where we are. He will send another team to finish the job." Torres closed his eyes. "So we are trapped." "Not trapped, just limited." Mary pulled out the GPS unit. "This has an emergency beacon function. If I activate it, the signal goes to satellite, not to Firebase. Search and rescue coordinates through a different command structure. Soren might hear about it, but he cannot intercept the response. So do it. It also broadcasts our exact position to everyone within 50 kilometers. Every insurgent with a radio scanner will know where to find us." Torres opened his eyes and looked at her. The fever made his gaze watery, but his voice was steady. Then we better be ready when they come. Mary looked at the tributary stretching out before them. The water was calm, reflecting the pale morning sky. Somewhere out there, Soren was waiting for confirmation that his loose ends had been tied. Somewhere out there, Ketch was still alive, still hoping for rescue. She activated the beacon. The signal pulsed outward, invisible and unstoppable, carrying their position to the satellites above. Help would come. So would the enemy. The only question was which would arrive first. Mary checked her rifle and settled into position. The tributary had kept them hidden through the night. Now it would become their killing ground. Let them come, she said quietly. I have enough bullets for all of them. They came from the north. 3 boats cutting through the morning mist, engines growling low, armed men crowded on each deck. Mary counted 12 hostiles before the lead boat rounded the bend and its spotlight began sweeping the mangroves. She pressed herself flat against the root platform, rifle raised, eye to scope. Torres lay motionless beside her, his breathing shallow and ragged. The fever had taken most of his strength. He could not run. He could barely sit up. If those boats found them, he would die in this swamp. The spotlight swept closer. Mary tracked its arc, calculating angles and distances. 90 meters to the lead boat. The driver stood at the stern, one hand on the tiller, the other holding a radio. The spotlight operator sat at the bow, panning the beam across the water with methodical patience. Behind them, 8 fighters scanned the banks with weapons ready. Mary had 14 rounds remaining. 12 enemies visible, probably more she could not see. The math was not in her favor. The spotlight beam passed over their position. For a frozen moment, Mary saw everything illuminated in harsh white light. The tangled roots, the muddy platform. Torres's pale face turned toward the sky. Then the beam moved on, continuing its sweep downstream. She exhaled slowly. Not yet. They had not been seen yet. The boats slowed as they approached the beacon's broadcast position. Mary had placed the GPS unit 50 meters from their actual hide site, wedged into a hollow log that floated at the water's edge. The insurgents would find it. They would realize the signal was a decoy, but might buy her the second she needed. The lead boat reached the log. Someone shouted. The spotlight focused on the floating debris, and a fighter leaned over the side to retrieve the beacon. He held it up, triumphant for a moment, then confused. He showed it to the others. More shouting, pointing toward the mangroves. Toward her. Mary made her choice. Her first shot took the spotlight operator through the chest. He tumbled backward into the water, and the light spun wildly before splashing into the tributary and going dark. Her second shot hit the driver, dropping him over the tiller. The boat lurched sideways, engines still running, and collided with the second vessel. Chaos erupted. The fighters scrambled for cover, firing blindly into the mangroves. Bullets tore through leaves and bark, snapping branches, churning the water. Mary was already moving, sliding off the platform into the tributary, using the root system as cover while she repositioned. She surfaced behind a different cluster of mangroves and fired twice more. 2 more bodies splashed into the water. The insurgents still could not find her. They were shooting at shadows, at sounds, at anything that moved. One of them hit another by accident, and the screaming added to the confusion. Mary used the tributary itself as her weapon. She knew the water, understood its currents and depths, had memorized its channels during the night. The insurgents knew only that death was coming from somewhere in the darkness, silent and precise. She killed 3 more before they regrouped. The survivors abandoned the boats and made for the banks, seeking solid ground where they could establish positions. That was their mistake. Mary had spent 3 deployments learning to kill from concealment. The jungle was her element, not theirs. The next 20 minutes were methodical. She moved through the water like a crocodile, surfacing only to fire, disappearing before they could return accurate shots. The bodies floated downstream one by one. The tributary ran red, then brown, then silent again as the current carried the evidence away. When it was over, 8 men lay dead. The 4 survivors had retreated upstream, their boats drifting aimlessly in the current. Mary let them go. She had made her point. Anyone else who came looking would know what waited for them. She swam back to the hide site and pulled herself onto the platform. Her shoulder burned where a round had grazed her during the firefight. She had not even noticed it happening. Adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. Torres was conscious, his eyes wide. "I heard the shooting," he said. "I thought you were dead." Mary examined her wound. The bullet had torn a furrow across her deltoid, deep enough to bleed freely, but not deep enough to compromise the muscle. She would need stitches eventually. For now, a pressure bandage would have to do. "8 down," she said. "For Rand. More will come." Torres watched her wrap the wound. "How many bullets do you have left?" 6. The number hung between them. 6 rounds against however many Sorns sent next. The beacon had done its job, broadcasting their position to rescue assets, but it had also painted a target on their backs. Every hostile in the region would be converging on this location. Mary finished the bandage and checked her rifle. The barrel was hot, the action foul with river water and carbon. She cleaned it as best she could, working by feel in the dim morning light. Torres spoke again, his voice distant. "When Lily was born, I was in country. Missed the whole thing. My wife sent me a video. 18 hours of labor, and I watched it on a 6-inch screen in a plywood shack 10,000 miles away." Mary did not respond. She knew he needed to talk, needed something to hold on to while his body fought the infection spreading through his gut. "She has my nose," Torres continued. "Poor kid, but she has her mother's smile. This big, gummy, toothless grin that makes everything else disappear." He paused, his breath catching. "I promised I would be there for her first steps. Promised I would teach her to ride a bike. Promised I would walk her down the aisle someday." "You will," Mary said. Torres turned his head to look at her. His eyes were wet, and not just from the fever. "You really believe that?" Mary thought about Tobias, about promises she had made to him that she could never keep, about the empty space at her grandmother's table where he should have been sitting. "I believe I am going to do everything in my power to make it true," she said. "That is all any of us can do." Torres reached out and took her hand. His grip was weak, trembling, but certain. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not leaving me." Mary squeezed his hand once, then released it. She turned her attention back to the tributary, watching for movement, listening for engines. The sun was rising now, burning off the mist, exposing their position to anyone with eyes and patience. She had 6 bullets, 1 wounded soldier, and a traitor who wanted them both dead. The odds were impossible. The situation was hopeless. But Meridian O'Yelleran had been hopeless before. She had buried her parents and her brother. She had faced down enemies in 3 different wars. She had learned that hope was not something you found. It was something you made one breath at a time, one trigger pull at a time. The tributary stretched before her, calm and patient. Somewhere out there, help was coming. She just had to stay alive long enough to meet it. And if more enemies came first, well, 6 bullets would have to be enough. Torres stopped breathing just after noon. Mary had been watching the tributary when she heard the silence. That absence of sound where his ragged inhales should have been. She turned and found him motionless on the platform, chest still, lips turning blue. She was on him in an instant, tilting his head back, clearing his airway, pressing her mouth to his and forcing breath into his lungs. 1, 2, 3. She checked for a pulse and found nothing. Started compressions, her palms driving into his sternum with desperate rhythm. "Come on," she hissed between breaths. "Come on, Torres. Your daughter needs you. Lily needs her father." 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. The jungle pressed in around them, indifferent to the small tragedy unfolding on the mangrove platform. Mary's arms burned. Her shoulder screamed where the bullet had grazed her. She did not stop. A minute passed. Then 2. Torres remained still beneath her hands, his body cooling in the humid air. Mary felt the familiar darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. The same darkness that had swallowed her when they told her about Tobias. The void that whispered there was no point in fighting, no point in trying, no point in anything. She pushed harder, breathed deeper, refused to let the void win. On the 3rd minute, Torres coughed. Water and bile erupted from his mouth. His chest heaved, sucking in air with a wet, rattling gasp. His eyes flew open, wild and unfocused, and his hands clawed at the roots beneath him. "Easy," Mary said, holding him down. "Easy. You are okay. You stopped breathing, but you are back now. You're back." Torres stared at her. Recognition slowly returned to his eyes. He tried to speak and managed only a croak. "Do not talk. Just breathe. Slow and steady." She sat back on her heels, her whole body trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She had almost lost him. 3 minutes without oxygen, and she would have been alone in this swamp with a corpse and 6 bullets. A crashing sound from the jungle made her grab her rifle. She swung toward the noise, finger on the trigger, ready to spend her remaining rounds on whatever emerged from the undergrowth. Wild pigs burst from the tree line. A sounder of them, 8 or 9 animals, squealing and grunting as they plunged into the tributary and swam for the opposite bank. They passed within 10 meters of the hide site, without slowing, focused entirely on whatever had spooked them. Mary watched them go, her heart hammering. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Almost. Pigs," Torres wheezed. "Almost died, and it is just pigs." Mary lowered her rifle. The absurdity of the moment cut through the tension like a blade. She felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of fear and desperation that had been tightening since the ambush. It did not disappear entirely, but it eased enough for her to think clearly again. She returned to Torres's side and checked his vitals. His pulse was thready but present. His breathing was shallow but consistent. The antibiotics were fighting the infection, buying him time he desperately needed. "You died," she said quietly. "Your heart stopped for almost 3 minutes." Torres closed his eyes. "I saw her." Mary frowned. "Saw who?" "Lily." He swallowed hard, his throat working. She was standing in a field of flowers. Sunlight everywhere. She looked at me and smiled, and I wanted to go to her so badly. But then I heard your voice. You were calling me back. Mary did not know what to say. She had never believed in visions or afterlives or any of the comforts people invented to make death bearable. But she had seen the look on Torres's face when he woke. Whatever he experienced had been real to him. "She was not ready for you," Mary said finally. "Neither am I." Torres opened his eyes and looked at her. His gaze was clearer than it had been since the ambush. "When we get out of this," he said, "I want you to meet her. Lily, I want her to know the woman who saved her father." Mary nodded once. "When we get out of this." She turned back to the tributary, giving herself a moment to process everything that had just happened. The near death, the pigs, the strange calm that had settled over the jungle. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for whatever came next. Her eyes fell on the damaged phone she had taken from the dead insurgent. She had been so focused on survival that she had not examined it fully. Now, with Torres stable and the immediate threat past, she pulled it out and powered it on again. The cracked screen flickered to life. She navigated through the corrupted files, looking for anything she might have missed. Most of the data was unrecoverable, but buried in a folder labeled with random characters, she found a voice memo. She pressed play. Captain Soren's voice emerged from the tiny speaker, tinny but unmistakable. Confirmation received. Primary targets neutralized by 1830. Secondary sweep underway. The woman may have survived initial contact. She is resourceful. Recommend immediate follow-up before she reaches communication range. A pause. Then another voice, deeper, unfamiliar. And if she makes contact, Soren again. Then we contain it. I have assets in place at Firebase Kestrel. Any transmission she sends routes through my station. She cannot reach anyone who matters without me knowing. The recording ended. Mary stared at the phone, her jaw tight. There it was. Proof. Soren's own voice admitting to the betrayal, confirming that he had orchestrated the ambush, acknowledging that he controlled communications at the Firebase. She had been right. Every radio call she made through normal channels would go straight to the man who wanted her dead. The beacon had bypassed him by going to satellite, but any rescue coordinated through Firebase would be compromised. Torres had propped himself up on one elbow, listening. "That is him," he said. "That is the voice from the briefing." "Yes. So what do we do?" Mary considered the question. The recording changed everything. It was no longer just about survival. It was about justice, about making sure Soren paid for what he had done to her team. She thought about Vickers, face down in the water, about Weston, peaceful in death, about Ketch, dragged screaming into the jungle, about the families who would receive folded flags and empty condolences because one man decided their lives were worth less than whatever he had been paid. "We survive," she said. "We get you to medical, and then we burn Captain Aldrich's Soren to the ground." Torres managed a weak smile. "I like that plan." Mary pocketed the phone and checked the tributary. The sun was past its peak now, beginning its long slide toward evening. Help could arrive at any moment. So could more enemies. She heard helicopters in the distance. 2 birds, flying low, rotors beating the air with that distinctive thrum she knew as well as her own heartbeat. Rescue. But something was wrong. The helicopters were coming from the wrong direction. Rescue assets would approach from the south, from Firebase Kestrel. These birds were coming from the north, from deeper in hostile territory. Mary watched them descend through a gap in the canopy. Black helicopters with no visible markings. Door gunners scanning the jungle below, but not the way search and rescue scanned. They were hunting. She grabbed Torres and pulled him deeper into the mangroves. "Those are not friendlies." "How do you know?" "Because rescue does not come with guns pointed down." The helicopters passed overhead, circling the beacon's position. Mary watched through the root system as ropes dropped and men fast-stroked to the ground. 12 operators in unmarked gear, moving with military precision. Soren had sent his own team, and this time they were not insurgents playing soldier. These were professionals. Mary checked her rifle. 6 rounds against 12 trained killers. The odds had just gotten worse. She looked at Torres, then at the tributary stretching into the jungle. They needed to move. They needed to disappear. And somehow, they needed to stay alive long enough for the real rescue to arrive. Mary moved through the water with Torres clinging to her back. His arms were wrapped around her neck, his legs dragging uselessly behind him. She could feel his heartbeat against her spine, weak but steady. He was alive. That was all that mattered. The tributary narrowed as they pushed deeper into the mangrove maze. The canopy overhead grew thicker, blocking out the afternoon sun and casting everything in shades of green and brown. Mary navigated by instinct, choosing channels that offered the most concealment, avoiding open stretches where the kill team's thermal optics might spot them. Behind her, she could hear the hunters organizing. Radio chatter carried across the water, fragments of commands and acknowledgments. They were spreading out, establishing a perimeter, preparing to sweep inward. Professional tactics. These men knew what they were doing. Mary found a hollow beneath a massive root system, a pocket of air and shadow just large enough for 2 bodies. She pulled Torres inside and pressed him against the muddy wall. "Do not move," she whispered. "Do not make a sound." Torres nodded weakly. His eyes were glassy again, the fever reasserting itself after the stress of his cardiac arrest. She did not know how much longer he could hold on. Mary positioned herself at the entrance to their hide, rifle ready. She had 6 rounds, 12 enemies. The mathematics of survival demanded creativity. She thought about the kill team's approach. They would sweep systematically, checking every potential hiding spot, using their numbers to overwhelm any resistance. Against a normal target, the tactic would work perfectly. But Mary was not a normal target. She had spent years learning to think like prey, to anticipate where hunters would look and position herself where they would not. The tributary was her advantage. These men were trained for land combat, for buildings in deserts and mountains. The water was foreign to them. 2 operators appeared at the far end of the channel, moving in a tactical crouch along the bank. They swept their weapons across the mangroves, checking shadows, scanning for movement. Mary watched them through her scope, calculating distance and angle. 80 meters. She could take them both before they knew what happened. But the shots would reveal her position. The other 10 would converge within minutes. She let them pass. The operators moved on, disappearing around a bend in the tributary. Mary exhaled slowly, releasing tension she had not realized she was holding. Patience. That was the key. Let them search. Let them spread thin. Then strike where they least expected. Torres stirred behind her. His hand found her shoulder, squeezing weakly. "Mary," he breathed. "Quiet. No. Listen." His voice was barely audible. "You remind me of my sister Jean." Mary frowned, but did not turn from her watch position. Torres continued, his words slurring slightly from fever and exhaustion. "She raised me after our parents split. I was 8. She was 19. Worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. Never complained. Never quit. Just kept pushing forward no matter what. Torres, we need to stay silent. I know, but I need you to know something. In case I do not make it. You're going to make it." His grip tightened on her shoulder. "Jean died 3 years ago. Cancer. She fought it for 18 months, and I was deployed for most of it. Missed her last 6 weeks because of a mission that did not even matter." Mary felt something shift in her chest. She understood now why Torres had been so insistent about getting home to Lily. He had already lost one person he loved while he was far away. He could not bear to let it happen again. "She's why I keep going," Torres whispered. "Every time I want to give up, I think about Jean. What she would say if she saw me quit." His hand slipped from her shoulder, falling back to his side. "You have that same look she did. That stubborn refusal to let the world win." Mary did not respond. She could not. The weight of his words pressed against her heart, mingling with her own grief for Tobias, her own guilt for being absent when he needed her most. A branch snapped somewhere nearby. Mary's attention snapped back to the present. She scanned the undergrowth, searching for the source of the sound. Another operator emerged from the jungle, closer than the others. He was alone, separated from his partner, moving carefully through the shallows. His weapon swept back and forth across the mangroves, inches from their hiding spot. Mary held her breath. The operator's boots splashed in the water less than 3 meters away. She could see his face now, young and hard, eyes scanning with professional intensity. If he turned, if he looked directly into the hollow where they hid, it would be over. The radio on his vest crackled. "Alpha 3, report." He stopped moving. Keyed the mic sector 7 clear. "Moving to 8. Copy. Continue sweep." The operator moved on, pushing deeper into the mangroves. Mary watched him disappear, her fingers still resting on the trigger. That had been close. Too close. She checked Torres. He had lost consciousness again, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion and fever. His breathing was shallow but regular. He would live a little longer. Maybe long enough for rescue to arrive. Mary weighed her options. The kill team was spreading out, covering more ground, but that also meant they were stretching their lines thin. Gaps were forming in their perimeter. Opportunities. She could stay hidden and hope they passed without finding them. She could wait for real rescue and pray it arrived before Soren's men completed their sweep. Or she could go on the offensive, take the fight to them, thin their numbers until the odds shifted in her favor. The choice was not really a choice at all. Hiding meant trusting luck. Mary had never trusted luck. She trusted her rifle, her training, and her willingness to do what others would not. She pressed her hand against Torres's chest, feeling his heartbeat. "Stay alive," she whispered. "I will be back." Then she slipped into the water and began to hunt. The first operator died without knowing she was there. She came up behind him in a deep channel, wrapped her arm around his throat, and pulled him under. He thrashed for 30 seconds before going still. She took his rifle, his ammunition, his radio, left his body floating face down in the current. The tributary ran silent after she crossed. It would run silent many more times before the day was done. 11 left, and Meridian O'Yelleran was just getting started. She killed 3 more before they realized what was happening. The second died in a flooded depression, his throat opened by her combat knife before he could key his radio. The third and fourth were a pair, moving together through a narrow channel. Mary waited until they separated to check opposite banks, then dropped them both with shots from the captured rifle. Clean, quick, professional. The radio she had taken crackled with panic chatter. "Alpha 2 is down. Alpha 4 and 5 not responding. We have contact," Repeat, we have contact. A voice cut through the chaos. Calm. Controlled. Familiar. All units consolidate on my position. We are being hunted. Regroup and sweep together. Mary froze. She knew that voice. She had heard it in the briefing room at Firebase Kestrel, smooth and confident as it sent her team to die. Captain Aldrich Sorn was here, in the jungle, leading the kill team personally. She had assumed he would stay safe at the firebase, coordinating from a distance. But Sorn had come himself. That meant he was desperate. The beacon, the failed ambush, the mounting body count. His carefully constructed operation was falling apart, and he had come to salvage it with his own hands. Mary smiled grimly. Good. She preferred to look her enemies in the eye. She keyed the captured radio. Captain Sorn, I was wondering when you would join us. Silence on the channel. Then his voice, stripped of its earlier calm. Staff Sergeant O'Yellerin, I should have known you would survive. You always were stubborn. That is what my grandmother used to say, right before she told me to finish what I started. Static. Then Sorn spoke again, his tone shifting to something almost conversational. You know this only ends one way, Meridian. You are alone in hostile territory with a wounded man who is probably dead by now. My team will find you eventually. Why prolong the inevitable? Mary moved as she talked, using his voice to triangulate his position. She slipped through the water like a shadow, rifle raised, eyes scanning. Tell me something, Captain. How much did they pay you? How much were 6 American lives worth? A pause. When he spoke again, there was something different in his voice. Something almost human. You want to know the truth? 1.2 million. Deposited in an offshore account over 27 months. He laughed bitterly. My wife had cancer, O'Yellerin. Stage 4. The treatments cost everything we had. Our savings. Our house. Our future. The Army insurance covered almost nothing. Mary felt disgust rise in her throat. So you sold us out to pay medical bills. I sold intel to keep my wife alive. The ambushes, the compromised operations, those were just byproducts. Acceptable losses in an unwinnable va. Acceptable losses. Vickers had a daughter in college. Weston was 3 months from rotation. Ketch joined up because she wanted to serve her country. You fed them to the enemy for money. Sorn's voice hardened. You think I wanted this? You think I woke up one day and decided to become a traitor? I spent 20 years serving this country. 20 years of sacrifice and deployments and watching good men die for nothing. And when I finally needed something back, the system told me to go bankrupt while my wife rotted from the inside out. Mary spotted movement through the trees. A cluster of operators converging on a position 200 meters ahead. Sorn was with them. She could see his silhouette, taller than the others, directing their movements with sharp gestures. She raised her rifle and put the crosshairs on his chest. Your wife, Mary said quietly into the radio. Is she still alive? A long pause. No, she died 8 months ago. The treatments bought her 2 extra years, but in the end, it was not enough. So you're still doing this. Still selling out soldiers. Still getting people killed. For what? She's gone, Sorn. Was left to pay for. His voice cracked. Habit. Survival. I do not know anymore. I stopped knowing a long time ago. Mary's finger rested on the trigger. 1 shot and it would be over. Justice for Vickers and Weston and all the others Sorn had betrayed. But killing him from a distance would not expose the network. Would not reveal who else was involved. Would not ensure that Ketch got rescued or that the families received the truth about how their loved ones died. She needed him alive. She needed him to face what he had done. She lowered her rifle. I'm going to give you a choice, Captain. Surrender now. Come in peacefully. Testify against whoever else is involved in this. You might spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth, but at least you will have the chance to make something right before you die. Sorn laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You think I am afraid of prison? I am already dead, O'Yellerin. Have been since Elena stopped breathing. This is just the cleanup. The radio clicked off. Mary saw Sorn gesture to his remaining men. 7 operators spread out, moving toward her position with renewed purpose. They knew she was close. They were done searching. She retreated through the tributary, mind racing. Sorn was not going to surrender. He had nothing left to lose, which made him more dangerous than ever. A man with nothing to live for would take any risk, accept any cost. She needed to change the equation, give him something to fear. Torres. Soren did not know Torres was still alive. Did not know about the evidence on the phone, the recording that would destroy everything Soren had built. If she could get that evidence out, get it to someone beyond Soren's reach, his entire operation would collapse. She made her way back to the hide site. Torres was where she had left him, unconscious but breathing. She knelt beside him and pulled out the damaged phone. "Wake up," she said, shaking him gently. "Torres, I need you to wake up." His eyes fluttered open. His gaze was unfocused, drifting. "Miri, listen to me." She pressed the phone into his hand. "This has everything. Soren's confession, the proof of what he did. If something happens to me, you need to get this to someone outside Firebase Kestrel. Anyone in a different chain of command. Do you understand?" Torres looked at the phone, then at her face. "What are you going to do?" Mary checked her rifle. Full magazine from the captured weapon. 18 rounds. She had killed 4 of them. 8 remained, plus Soren. "I'm going to end this," she said. Torres grabbed her wrist. His grip was stronger than she expected. "Wait." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a crease photograph. His daughter. "Take this." Mary frowned. "Why?" "Because I need you to come back." Torres pressed the photo into her hand. "If you have her, you have to come back. To give her to me. Promise." Mary looked at the small face in the picture. Lily Torres, 11 months old, smiling that gummy smile her father had described. She tucked the photo into her vest pocket, next to the worn image of Tobias. "I promise," she said. Then she slipped back into the water and went to war. The jungle erupted into violence at dusk. Mary hit them from the flank, emerging from a channel they had already cleared. The first operator dropped before he could turn, her round punching through his vest at close range. The second spun and fired wild, his bullets shredding leaves 3 meters to her left. She put 2 shots in his chest, and he crumpled into the water. 6 left. She was moving before the bodies settled, using the chaos to reposition. The remaining operators scattered for cover, shouting coordinates, tried to establish where the fire was coming from. Mary gave them no time to think. She flanked left through a flooded depression, came up behind a third man, and dropped him with a single shot to the base of his skull. 5 left. Return fire cracked through the mangroves. Bark exploded near her head. Mary dove into the tributary and let the current carry her downstream, surfacing behind a fallen tree 50 meters from where she had been. The operators were converging on her last position, pouring rounds into empty jungle. She steadied her breathing, counted heartbeats, waited. 2 of them moved together through the shallows, covering each other with practiced precision. Good tactics, but they were looking in the wrong direction. Mary rose from the water like a specter and fired twice. Both men fell. 3 left, and one of them was Soren. The captain's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Fall back to the extraction point. We are leaving." Mary keyed her captured radio. "Running away, Captain? I thought you had nothing left to lose." Static. Then Soren's reply, tight with barely controlled rage. "You have made your point, O'Yellerin. But this is not over. I have resources you cannot imagine. Kill me today, and someone else takes my place tomorrow. Maybe, but you will still be dead." She tracked his movement through the jungle. He was retreating toward the helicopters with his 2 remaining men, moving fast, abandoning any pretense of hunting her. The predator had become prey, and he knew it. Mary followed. The tributary curved toward a clearing where the helicopters had landed. She could see them through the trees, rotors still, pilots waiting in their seats. Soren and his men broke from the jungle and sprinted toward the nearest bird. She had a choice. Let them go and survive, or stop them and risk everything. There was no choice at all. Mary burst from the water and ran. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, her wounded shoulder throbbed with every stride. She covered 50 meters in seconds, rifle up, scope. The first operator turned at the sound of her approach. She shot him through the throat before he could raise his weapon. The second dove behind a landing skid and returned fire. Bullets snapped past her head. She dropped to one knee, steadied her aim, and put a round through the gap between the skid and the fuselage. He slumped forward and did not move. Soren was at the helicopter door. He had a pistol in his hand, pointed at the pilot. "Gus in the air," he screamed. "Now!" The rotor began to spin. Mary sprinted the final 20 meters, knowing she would not reach him in time. The helicopter lifted, wobbling slightly as it rose. Soren leaned out of the open door, pistol aimed at her, triumph flickering across his face. She fired. The round took him in the hand. The pistol spun away into the rotor wash. Soren screamed and clutched his shattered fingers, stumbling backward into the cabin. The helicopter continued to rise. 10 feet. 15. Mary watched it climb, calculating angles and distances. She had 3 rounds left. The pilot was an innocent, just following orders. She could not shoot the aircraft down without killing him, but she could make sure Soren did not escape. She aimed at the tail rotor and fired twice. The first round sparked off metal. The second found its mark. The tail rotor seized, throwing the helicopter into an uncontrolled spin. The pilot fought the controls, but physics won. The aircraft slammed into the jungle canopy and crashed through branches before impacting the ground 50 meters from the clearing. Mary ran toward the wreckage. Smoke poured from the engine. The pilot hung limp in his harness, unconscious but breathing. The cabin was empty. Soren had been thrown clear. She found him crawling through the undergrowth, his right hand a ruin of blood and bone, his leg twisted at an ugly angle. He heard her approach and rolled onto his back, staring up at her with eyes full of pain and hatred. "Finish it," he spat. "You won. Kill me." Mary stood over him, rifle pointed at his chest. She thought about Vickers and Weston, about Ketch, still out there somewhere, about Torres, fighting for his life in a mangrove swamp, about Tobias, who died in an ambush just like this one because someone had betrayed him. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Then she thought about Lily Torres, about the photograph in her pocket, about the promise she had made. "No," she said. Soren blinked. "What?" "You do not get to die a soldier." Mary lowered her rifle. "You get to live. You get to stand trial. You get to look the families of the men you killed in the eye and explain why their loved ones are not coming home." She reached down and grabbed his collar, pulling his face close to hers. "You get to spend the rest of your miserable life knowing exactly what you are." She released him and stepped back. Soren lay in the mud, staring at her with something she had never expected to see in his eyes. Fear. The sound of helicopters reached her ears. Different helicopters. She looked up and saw 2 Black Hawks approaching from the south, the direction of Firebase Kestrel. But these birds had markings she recognized. Theater Command. Colonel Vinn's personal squadron. The real rescue had finally arrived. Mary keyed her radio, broadcasting on the emergency frequency. "This is Staff Sergeant Meridian O'Yelleran. I have 1 hostile in custody. Captain Aldrich Soren. He is the traitor responsible for the ambush on my team. I have evidence. I have his confession. And I have a wounded soldier who needs immediate medevac." A voice crackled back. "Staff Sergeant, this is Colonel Vinn. We are inbound to your position. Secure the prisoner and stand by." Mary looked down at Soren. He had closed his eyes, his face pale from blood loss and shock. The most dangerous man she had ever faced, reduced to a broken thing in the mud. She thought about all the ways this could have ended. All the times she should have died. The ambush, the boats, the kill team. Any one of those moments could have been her last. But she was still standing. Torres was still alive, and Soren was going to face justice. The Tributary had run silent after she crossed. Now, it would carry the truth downstream, all the way to the people who needed to hear it. The Black Hawks touched down in the clearing, rotors flattening the tall grass and waves. Colonel Vinn was the first out, a compact man with silver hair and eyes that had seen 30 years of war. He walked toward Mary with 2 armed escorts flanking him, his gaze moving from her blood-soaked uniform to the broken man at her feet. "Staff Sergeant O'Yelleran," he said, "you have had quite a day." Mary snapped to attention, muscle memory overriding exhaustion. "Sir, I have a wounded soldier in the mangroves approximately 300 meters northeast. Specialist Torres. Good shot, septic, Needs immediate surgical intervention. Vin nodded to one of his men. Get a medic team to those coordinates now. He turned back to Mary, studying her face. And Captain Sorn? Mary looked down at the traitor. Sorn had not moved, his eyes still closed, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was going to shock from blood loss. Part of her wanted to let him bleed out in the mud. The larger part knew that would be too easy. He orchestrated the ambush that killed my team, she said. He has been selling operational intel to insurgent forces for at least 2 years. I have evidence, recordings, messages, frequency codes that prove he compromised our communications. Vin's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Those are serious accusations, Staff Sergeant. Yes, sir, and I can prove every one of them. She pulled the damaged phone from her pocket and handed it to the colonel. He examined it for a moment, then passed it to one of his escorts. Get this to intelligence. I want a full forensic workup within the hour. Sorn stirred on the ground. His eyes opened, finding Vin's face. Colonel, he croaked. She is lying. She cracked under pressure. Friendly fire. She killed her own team and invented this story to cover it up. Mary felt her jaw tighten, but said nothing. She had expected this. Sorn had nothing left except his lies, and he would cling to them until the evidence crushed him completely. Vin knelt beside the wounded captain. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Captain Sorn, I have known Meridian O'Yelleran for 4 years. I watched her earn her sniper qualification. I read every after-action report from her 3 deployments. I personally recommended her for this mission because I believed she was the best we had. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. I have known you for 6 months. In that time, 3 operations you provided intelligence for have ended in ambush. 17 soldiers dead. Until today, I thought it was bad luck or enemy adaptation. He paused. Now I'm thinking it was something else entirely. Sorn's face went pale. Colonel, I can explain. I'm sure you can. Vin stood and gestured to his escorts. Secure the prisoner. Full restraints. He does not speak to anyone until we reach command. The soldiers hauled Sorn to his feet. He screamed as weight hit his shattered hand and broken leg, but no one moved to comfort him. They dragged him toward the waiting helicopter, and Mary watched him go with something that felt almost like peace. Then turned back to her. Staff Sergeant, walk with me. They moved away from the clearing toward the edge of the tributary, where the water ran slow and dark. The colonel clasped his hands behind his back, his eyes fixed on the jungle canopy. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I assigned Sorn to your mission briefing. I put him in position to betray your team. That blood is partly on my hands. Mary shook her head. You could not have known, sir. No, but I should have suspected. The pattern was there. I just did not want to see it. He sighed heavily. We spend so much time looking for enemies outside the wire. We forget that sometimes the most dangerous ones wear the same uniform we do. A commotion near the helicopters drew their attention. Medics were emerging from the jungle, carrying a stretcher between them. Torres lay strapped to it, for lines running into both arms, an oxygen mask covering his face. He was pale, motionless, but the medics were moving with purpose rather than resignation. Mary started toward him. Vin followed. She reached the stretcher just as they were loading it into the medevac bird. Torres's eyes were closed, but when she touched his hand, they fluttered open. He stared at her for a long moment, confusion giving way to recognition. You came back, he whispered through the mask. Mary pulled the photograph from her pocket. Lily's face smiled up at her, innocent and unaware of how close her father had come to never seeing her again. She pressed the picture into Torres's hand, folding his fingers around it. I made a promise, she said. Torres looked at the photo, then back at her. His eyes were wet. Thank you. He swallowed hard. For everything. The medics lifted the stretcher into the helicopter. Mary stepped back as the doors closed. She watched the bird lift off, banking south toward the nearest surgical facility. Torres would live. She had done what she could not do for Tobias. She had brought someone home. Vin appeared beside her. The other helicopter is ready to take you back to Firebase Kestrel. You need medical attention for that shoulder. Mary glanced at her wound. She had almost forgotten about it. The bandage was soaked through, the flesh beneath throbbing with each heartbeat. Sir, there's something else. Specialist Ketch. She was captured during the initial ambush. The insurgents took her into the jungle. She might still be alive. Ving not dead. We recovered intel from Soren's helicopter before you brought it down. Coordinates for an insurgent camp 12 kilometers northeast. I have a strike team prepping now. He met her eyes. You have done enough, Staff Sergeant. Let someone else take this one. Mary thought about Ketch, the young specialist's trembling hands before the mission. The way she had looked at Mary with something like hope when she adjusted her pack straps. The screaming that had stopped so suddenly in the jungle. Sir, she said, with respect, I started this. I want to finish it. Vin studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Get that shoulder looked at. Brief the strike team on everything you observed. If Ketch is alive, we will bring her home. Mary saluted. Thank you, sir. She walked toward the waiting helicopter, her body aching with every step. Behind her, the tributary wound through the jungle, carrying the last traces of blood downstream. The water had witnessed everything. The ambush, the hunting, the justice. Now it ran silent again, keeping its secrets as it always had. But Mary was not done yet. Somewhere out there, Ketch was waiting. And Staff Sergeant Meridian O'Yelleran did not leave soldiers behind. The strike team hit the insurgent camp at 0300. Mary watched from a ridge 200 meters out, her rifle steady despite the fresh stitches in her shoulder. The medic had wanted to ground her, but Colonel Vin had overruled him. She had earned the right to see this through. Blackout conditions. No mon. The operators moved through the darkness like ghosts, their night vision painting the world in shades of green. Mary tracked them through her scope, providing overwatch, ready to eliminate any threat that emerged from the tree line. The camp was smaller than she expected. A cluster of wooden structures around a central clearing, guards posted at irregular intervals. Sloppy security. These men had grown comfortable, confident that no one would find them this deep in the jungle. They were wrong. The first shots came from the eastern perimeter. Suppressed rifles coughing in the darkness, guards dropping before they could raise an alarm. The strike team flowed into the camp like water, clearing structures one by one, their movements precise and coordinated. Mary scanned for Ketch. She had studied the camp layout during the briefing, memorizing the location of every building. The largest structure sat at the northern edge, partially hidden by vegetation. Intelligence suggested it was used for holding prisoners. Movement at the northern building. Mary adjusted her scope and saw two insurgents dragging a figure toward the tree line. The figure was small, stumbling, hands bound behind their back. Ketch. Mary keyed her radio. Overwatch to strike lead. Two hostiles moving north with a prisoner. I have a shot. The reply came immediately. Take it. She exhaled slowly. Squeezed the trigger. The first insurgent dropped. She cycled the bolt and fired again before his partner could react. The second man crumpled beside the first. Ketch stood frozen between the bodies, her face pale in the darkness. Even from 200 meters, Mary could see her trembling. Overwatch to strike lead. Prisoner secured. Moving to extract. She broke down her rifle and descended from the ridge, moving quickly through the jungle. By the time she reached Ketch, two operators had already cut the specialist bonds and wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders. Ketch looked up as Mary approached. Her eyes were hollow, her cheeks sunken. 3 days of captivity had carved years into her young face. But when she recognized Mary, something flickered behind the emptiness. Staff Sergeant, she whispered. You came. Mary knelt beside her. I told you to stay close. She managed a small smile. Sorry I was late. Ketch's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting tracks through the dirt and grime. She reached out and grabbed Mary's arm, holding on like she would never let go. They killed them, she said, her voice breaking. The others. They made me watch. They said no one was coming. They said I would die here. Mary pulled her close, wrapping her arms around the shaking specialist. They were wrong. You're going home, Ketch. It is over. The strike team finished clearing the camp. 12 insurgents dead, no friendly casualties. They gathered documents, hard drives, anything that might contain intelligence about Soren's network. The evidence would help prosecute not just the captain, but anyone else connected to his betrayal. The helicopter ride back to Firebase Kestrel was quiet. Ketch sat beside Mary, her head resting against the staff sergeant's shoulder. She had stopped crying, but her hand still trembled in her lap. The trauma would take years to process, maybe a lifetime, but she was alive. That was what mattered. Firebase Kestrel looked different in the pre-dawn light. Smaller somehow, less imposing. Mary stepped off the helicopter and felt the weight of the past 3 days settle onto her shoulders. Exhaustion pulled at her bones, urged her towards sleep. She ignored it. Colonel Vin met them on the tarmac. He looked at Ketch, then at Mary, and nodded once. "Well done, Staff Sergeant." "Sir." Mary straightened despite her fatigue. "What happens now?" "Now we clean house." Vin gestured toward the command building. Soren talked, not voluntarily, but the evidence was overwhelming. He gave up 3 other assets in the region, local contacts who facilitated his communications with the insurgents. "We are rolling them up as we speak." "And Soren himself?" "Military tribunal. Fast track." The charges include espionage, conspiracy, and accessory to murder for every soldier who died because of his intel. He paused. He will never see the outside of Leavenworth again. Mary thought about the conversation she had with Soren in the jungle. His dead wife. His desperate justifications. The hollow look in his eyes when she refused to kill him. "Good," she said. "Let him live with it." Vin studied her face. "You could have executed him in the field. No one would have questioned it. Why did you bring him back alive?" Mary considered the question. She thought about Tobias, about Torres, about Ketch trembling in the darkness, about all the families who would never see their loved ones again because of one man's choices. "Because death is easy," she said finally. "Living with what you have done is hard. I wanted him to have the hard thing." Vin was silent for a moment. Then he reached out and clasped her shoulder. "Get some rest, Staff Sergeant. You have earned it." She watched him walk away, then turned back toward the medical building. Torres would be in surgery by now, fighting for his life on an operating table. Ketch would be starting the long process of psychological evaluation and recovery. And somewhere in a holding cell, Aldrich Soren was contemplating the ruins of everything he had built. Mary walked across the tarmac, her boots echoing on the concrete. The sun was rising in the east, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. A new day, a new beginning. She thought about her grandmother in Houston, about the house where she had grown up, where Tobias's room still sat unchanged, waiting for a boy who would never come home. She would call her grandmother today, tell her she was safe, tell her that she had saved someone this time. It would not bring Tobias back. Nothing would. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to start healing the wound his death had left behind. Mary paused at the medical building entrance and looked back at the jungle beyond the perimeter. The tributary was out there somewhere, winding through the darkness, keeping its secrets. It had witnessed her transformation from survivor to hunter to something else entirely. She did not know what to call herself now. Hero felt wrong. Soldier felt incomplete. Maybe there was no word for what she had become. Maybe she would have to invent one. 1 month later, Mary stood in a sunlit courtyard at Fort Bragg, surrounded by 200 soldiers in dress uniforms. The ceremony had drawn a crowd. Word had spread through the ranks about what happened in that jungle, about the staff sergeant who survived an ambush, hunted a kill team, and exposed a traitor. The official reports were classified, but soldiers talked. They always did. Colonel Vin stood at the podium, reading from a citation that used words like extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry. Mary barely heard them. Her attention kept drifting to the front row, where 2 figures sat watching her with expressions she would never forget. Torres was in a wheelchair, his midsection still wrapped in bandages beneath his dress uniform. The surgeons had removed a section of his intestine and repaired damage to his kidney. He would need months of physical therapy before he could walk normally again. But he was alive. His daughter sat in his lap, 11 months old now, her dark eyes wide with wonder at all the people and colors and sounds. Lily Torres. the girl from the photograph. Then finished reading and turned to face her. Staff Sergeant Meridian O'Yelleran, for actions above and beyond the call of duty, it is my honor to present you with the Silver Star. He pinned the medal to her chest. The weight was negligible, a small piece of metal on a ribbon, but what it represented pressed against her heart with a force that nearly buckled her knees. The crowd applauded. Mary snapped a salute to Vin, then turned to face the assembled soldiers. She found Ketch in the third row, standing at attention, her eyes glistening. The young specialist had been medically cleared 2 weeks ago. She had requested transfer to sniper training. Said she wanted to learn from the best. Mary had recommended her personally. After the ceremony, the crowd dispersed into small groups. Officers shook her hand. Enlisted soldiers nodded with quiet respect. A general she had never met told her she was a credit to the uniform. Mary accepted the praise with grace, but her focus remained elsewhere. She found Torres by the memorial wall, his wheelchair parked in the shade of an old oak tree. Lily was asleep in his arms, her small fist clutching the collar of his uniform. Mary sat on the bench beside them. She did not speak. Neither did he. They watched the shadows lengthen across the courtyard, comfortable in the silence they had earned together. Finally, Torres shifted Lily's weight and turned to face her. "I told my wife about you," he said. "Everything. The ambush. The swamp. How many times you saved my life." Mary nodded. "What did she say?" "She said she wants to meet you." He smiled, the expression soft and genuine. "She said anyone who would go through what you did to bring me home is family." The word hit Mary harder than she expected. Family. She had not had much of that since Tobias died. Her grandmother was getting older, frailier with each passing year. The army had become her family, but it was a family of uniforms and ranks and rotations. Not permanence, not belonging. "I would like that," she said quietly. Torres reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. He handed it to her. Mary opened it and found herself looking at a picture of Lily, taken recently, her gummy smile beaming at the camera. "She carries that everywhere now," Torres said. "The one you gave back to me. My wife had to pry it out of her hands to take this new one." He paused. "We want you to have it, so you remember that what you did mattered." Mary looked at the photograph. She thought about the worn image of Tobias in her pocket, the brother she could not save. She thought about the promises she made in that swamp, the ones she kept against all odds. She tucked Lily's picture next to Tobias's. "Thank you," she said. Torres nodded. Then his expression shifted, becoming more serious. "What happens now? Where do they send you next?" Mary had asked herself the same question. The Army had offered her options. Instructor positions, recruiting duty, a staff job at the Pentagon, safe assignments for a soldier who had already given more than most would ever be asked to give. She had turned them all down. "Back to the field," she said. "New unit, new mission." She looked at Torres. "There are more soldiers out there who need someone watching over them. I'm not done yet." Torres held her gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled. "No, I do not suppose you are." A hand touched Mary's shoulder. She turned to find Ketch standing behind her, crisp in her dress uniform, posture straight despite everything she had endured. "Staff Sergeant," Ketch said, "I just wanted to thank you, before you leave, for coming back for me, for not giving up." Mary stood and faced the young specialist. She remembered the trembling hands before the mission, the screaming in the jungle, the hollow eyes in the insurgent camp. Ketch had survived all of it. She would carry scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of her life. But she was still standing. "You do not owe me thanks," Mary said. "You survived because you were strong enough to hold on. I just provided the opportunity." Ketch shook her head. "You provided hope. When I had none left, you gave me a reason to keep fighting. That is worth more than any medal." Mary felt something crack in her chest. A wall she had built years ago when they told her Tobias was gone. She had kept everyone at a distance since then, afraid that caring would only lead to more loss. But Torres and Ketch and Lily had slipped through her defenses without her noticing. She pulled Ketch into a hug. The specialist stiffened in surprise, then relaxed, returning the embrace. "Make me proud in sniper school," Mary said quietly. "And when you get your own team, Remember what it felt like to be the one who needed saving. I will, Ketch whispered. I promise. They separated. Ketch wiped her eyes, saluted, and walked away to join a group of fellow soldiers. Mary watched her go, feeling something she had not felt in years. Hope. She turned back to Torres and Lily. The baby had woken up, her dark eyes finding Mary's face with that intense focus only infants possessed. Lily reached out one small hand, fingers grasping at the air. Mary leaned down and let the baby grab her finger. The tiny grip was surprisingly strong. She has her father's stubbornness, Torres said. Mary smiled. She will need it. She straightened and looked out across the courtyard. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere far away, a tributary wound through a jungle, silent and patient, keeping the secrets of what had happened in its waters. Mary touched the two photographs in her pocket. Tobias and Lily. The brother she lost and the child she helped save. The past she could not change and the future she had fought to protect. The tributary had run silent after she crossed. But Meridian O'Yelleran had found her voice, and she would use it to protect as many soldiers as she could, for as long as she could, until there was nothing left to give. That was the promise she made to herself, the promise she intended to keep. If this story moved you, drop a comment about what resonated most, whether it was the bond between Mary and Torres, her refusal to leave anyone behind, or someone in your own life who showed that kind of quiet, unbreakable strength when everything was on the line.